So I wanted to take a moment and expand on UrlScan a little bit. We've kind of did a big overview before, but really I wanted to talk more about its search. So let's go ahead and jump to search. You'll see here I've kind of got it showing all details. This is something I like to do so I can see more. It's an optional thing. If you find this distracting, just turn it off. But I like to see at a glance certain things, and so this makes me feel better. One of the things I want to talk about is an easy search to start with. And I've noticed, and I covered this a little bit before, that you can do lookups in URL. So you can get the URI of a URL piece and look for different things. Or you can look for file name pieces. I've chosen Mosey just because there's a lot of details on it for no other reason than that. And you can see here every couple of minutes there's some kind of submission for Mosey that's happening. Now one thing I've noticed, you note here that some of these have kind of this checkbox. And if you follow, say, number 15 here, you realize that it couldn't actually scan it when it got sent to UrlScan. But if you look at this one here, anything with this little checkbox here, you'll see that that's actually a valid hit. Like it went through the process of gaining access to either the file or resolving the URL properly. And so we want to trap for that. Like we don't want to necessarily have to scroll down or scroll up like I just did. And so there's a couple of ways you can do that. Some of the simplest ways is, well, let me show you actually. Let's go to one that failed. So you get here, you get a failure. You're like, I don't want to capture these. How do I figure out how to kind of look for that? So if you look at the JSON output, you'll see that they captured a lot of the details even if it didn't succeed. And there's quite a bit of data in here you can parse and use. And some of these things are actually searchable items or items you can use to your advantage. And I'll kind of scroll through these real quick. And we're going to use one of them for exactly that. And so one of the things that I like to do is if there was data transfer, then there's going to be a size variable that we can play with. So let me back up here for a second. And I've captured this already, but in our search, we're going to use this encoded data length variable. Now let me go back to the JSON. And if I do a quick search here, you'll see it's under response that the data length was 0. So essentially what I'm going to do to make our search a little better is I'm going to ask for, from the stats part of things, that encoded data length, I want it to be greater than 0. And what that's going to do is remove a lot of the false positives I was seeing that were, well, not so much false positives, but seeing things that didn't actually resolve to a file or do resolution at all. As you can see here now, my list is much beefier with things that I could go do a lookup on. Now, before I move away from that, that JSON that has the failure has its own value as well, because it contains a ton of data about what's kind of within each one of these. And I picked Mosey, like I said, just because it was active. And you see, because now that we've asked for it to actually resolve, a lot of the things we were looking for are no longer showing up. We're getting things that are a little bit older, which is fine. I mean, the objective here is just to use an example of how to find things. Now I want to point out, we're looking for Mosey, 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 and you look here, this one's a little different. It actually has the command in the URI string, so let's jump to that one to take a look at it. Now if you see here, I never look at them up here because it's kind of confusing. So I go to page URL history, and you see here it breaks it out for me. And there's a bunch of things in here that we can use. So you see here you got the Netgear. So this tells us almost universally so far that this has been an abusive Netgear. And maybe that's interesting. Maybe we want to look for that instead of, say, just Mosey itself. So let's take pieces of this. In fact, let's. I've set up a query that looks at this setup CGI piece. Let me jump to that. So effectively, you could just copy it out. But what I'm going to do is to make things a little quicker and a little more convenient, I've put this off to the side. So I'm going to bring this in here where I've just said, hey, in the page URL, wherever you see the setup.cgi next file, I want to pull that out. And it looks like I don't know how to type, so let me do this, finish out my parentheses correctly. Now we're getting different hits, some from 9 days ago that weren't captured in just the Mosey file, because this doesn't necessarily have Mosey in it. Now this one didn't resolve, but this one did, so let's take a look at it. You can see here again, let's go look at the URL page history. You kind of get a link there. Here's the setup.cgi next file. This is what I'm keying on. You can see here it's a command to propagate, basically, more than anything else. And it's trying to get the download from this 141.987.182 address, where feasibly there would be something installed that it could pull down Mosey and continue to propagate. Now, let's do the same thing we did before and clean out these kind of false positives. So we'll do kind of the same thing. Again, I've kind of canned this already, including with my previous error, but let's fix that. I've added stats.encodedData.length. I'm sorry, yeah, encoded data length greater than 0, just so I can get rid of, what did I do now? Ah, I see. I put the parentheses in the wrong place. There we go. Now I've weeded out all those non-resolving ones, and it moved me to 22 days, but that's okay. What I've got here is things with the next file in it. Now, maybe I don't want to necessarily do that. Maybe I want to dig into and look a little deeper. So some of the things I like to do from here to continue kind of to dig is my objective here. So I'm just looking at Mosey, but I could literally be looking at anything. But let's say I wanted to get Mosey where there was a very specific response. So I could go here. The response failed, but that's okay. Let's see what it says. Now this particular one kicked out a web page with an assets link and a couple items here and what looks like Turkish, I suspect. But let's do, that would make sense. Let's do a different one. Let's look at this one. And again, going to HTTP tab, looking at the response. And this one wants to tell me it's in Korean, which is perfect. And it gives me an error page. So let's say I want to find all of these error pages. Now it would be, if you look here at this hourglass, if you click down, it gives you more information. Like you can look at the headers if you want, both the request and response headers. I usually turn those off for this. But maybe I want to find every response page like this where it failed. That's where this resource hash comes into play. So if I click it, it's going to regenerate and say, hey, this is the only one I saw that's exactly like that. That's not quite what I want to do. I want to find one that's repeating, one that's more common. So let's look at a couple of these. Again, I went to one that resolved. I've got a not found page. Let's go to HTTP. There's the response. Let's take a look at it. Okay, we've got a more atypical HTTP error 404 page. So let's see if we can use that. Again, I'm going to hit this hourglass here, and I'm going to look by this resource hash. Like, how common is this page? This page is enormously more common. And so we just pick one randomly. How about this one? So now this is giving me a 404 page, similar to what I saw with the Mosey infection, but it isn't actually specific to what I was just looking at. Like, I am getting the same 404 page, and that's good, but that's not quite what I'm looking for. Like, I want to keep my connection with Mosey. So I'm going to go back to that. But before I do, the point here is that you can get a very atypical response. And if you look, a lot of these responses are coming from the same location. And that's probably just because of the way this was submitted. You can see it starts separating more now into different things. So kind of keep that in mind. You can kind of follow it by error pages is kind of what I'm pointing out here. In this case, I want to pick something else. Like this one came from what looks like, yeah, there we go. One that came from a Netgear or something similar. I want to follow that. There we are. And what I'm looking for here is, what did I get back as a response? Like, here's a global protect. You can tell because it tells you right there. This is more general. Got a cloud service. Oh, okay. So we're kind of seeing a lot of global protects. So this might be an error page that is more specific, let's say, to global protect, or it has a bunch of them in there. If I wanted to make sure that I was seeing just global protect kind of responses, what I could do is, again, concatenate that and in there. And then because I know it's in the URL, so we could say, hey, page.url, like we did earlier, we want it where it has global protect. Now this will definitively give me global protect answers where that standardized kind of 404 page was present. As you can see here, now we're just getting specifically global protects. Now, if I thought that was too restrictive, you'll notice there's a login.esp page. So some people actually remove global protect from the URL to protect themselves, which is an excellent action you can do. And if you look here, now I've set it up so that I only get the login.esp page. Now, it didn't really show a big difference. So to contrast that, let's do this, right? And not page.url. And then what we're going to do is remove the global protect versions and see if we get a different response. We could get nothing. I don't know until we run this. Okay, so this is ones where global protect is not in the URL, but it's still showing login.esp. So I could run both searches and get a greater breadth of the error page in conjunction with a detection for this global protect VPN. Now you see here I've got 33 results. If I removed the error page, because I was curious about just how many global protects I would find where their global protect is not in the URI, you'll see it jumps a bit bigger. Now I'm getting a much larger number, some of which don't seem to resolve, some of which do. And it's just a way to kind of figure out, zoom in, hone in on what you want to find. In this case, I was looking for, at the end, global protect. I pivoted from Mosey and kind of moseyed my way, if you'll pardon the pun, over to it. Now, one thing I've also want to point out is assets and resources tend to be great pivots as well. And for example, take this favicon icon, which is probably going to belong to all of these global protects. I could just look for that resource. And reasonably, that favicon might take me to global protects. And now in this case, it did not, which tells me, as I followed that, that this is not a unique image. Now I could actually download it and look at it and so forth. But let's see if we can find something similar to that that does. So I'm going to go backwards here a little bit. I'm going to make sure I get a global protect. And go to here, and it has a favicon. Let's see if this changes it. I did get a lot of global protects again, so this may be specific to it. And potentially it could be more generic. You'll see there's a mixed amount of items in here. But I don't necessarily know what's on this page to say for sure. So this could be a possible kind of pivot to locate global protects, but it's not really refined enough, right? There's too much ambiguity in that. So let's see if we can change that a little bit more. Let's go to one of these that we again know as a global protect. See if we can find a different asset. If we don't stumble across it pretty quickly, I do have one that I know will work for this, but I kind of want to show you as we're going. Here's that favicon, probably because we're still on that search. Let's back up some more. And yes, I'm backing up on purpose. Let's go back to this one. Here is the Netgear. Let's go back forward. There's our hash, repeating that action. And let's see here. Here's one that I think we looked at this one already, but just in case we did. So there's that favicon again. What I'm looking for is a cascading style sheet or a different favicon, or potentially even a JavaScript or something similar that I could use as a pivot. And so even though I'm not finding it, I know this hash gives me more of the Mosey activity. So this is just me furthering the example of you can find things by hash. And what I was really looking for, sadly I'm not finding, is to find this by let me do this real quick and put this back in here. That way we have this to focus on. So I really want to look at global protects. What I'm looking for is one that has like I said, a separate resource. And this one does. Okay, here we go. So here's some cascading style sheets. Here's a PNG. And if I go back and look at the summary, you'll see there's some pictures here that are kind of atypical to the portal. But I don't want to use a picture necessarily because it tends to be something that's changeable and changed by folks. So I want to use a cascading style sheet because they tend to stay pretty static. So let's start with this Lotto Fonts one. Here we go. And here's its resource hash. Let's follow it. And let's see if we get a lot of global protects. And boy, did we. So that would be a good way to kind of hone in. Almost all these are global protects, so that's a good chance that that's very unique to it. And you can kind of replicate that same process with anything that you're looking for, kind of in the same way, using UrlScan to kind of cover everything and summarize slightly, to find the resources behind the scenes that are tying everything together, because often they're more static and they're more constant across different company installations than anything else, and it's better to rely on that than IPs or other pointer records or similar items. So hopefully that's helpful for today. This is me starting to go back through and touch base on UrlScan and other tools that we use in our threat intelligence toolbox. So hopefully you find it helpful, and I'll continue to do samples of this as we go forward. If you like this, please give us a thumbs up, follow if you think it's interesting. If you have comments, please put them below. Thank you.